The ancient stone walls of the Vatican hold many secrets, but none so heavy as the one born in the dead of night. Inside the Apostolic Palace, where silence itself seems to hold its breath in reverence, Cardinal Giovanni made his way through the hallowed halls. As Secretary of State and the Pope's oldest friend, he was accustomed to late-night summons, to matters of faith and geopolitics that could not wait for the dawn. But this was different. There had been no summons, only a deep, unsettling feeling that something was wrong. He reached the papal apartments and knocked softly. There was no answer. He knocked again, a little louder this time, his heart beginning to beat a heavy rhythm against his ribs. He quietly turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was empty. A cool night breeze whispered through an open window, rustling the pages of a book left open on a desk. But the Pope was not there. On a small, polished table, Pope Leo's rosary lay coiled, its well-worn beads gleaming in the soft lamplight. Beside it was a single sealed envelope, addressed to him in the Pope's familiar, elegant script. A quiet panic began to spread through the highest echelons of the Holy See. The Swiss Guard, stoic and unflappable, had no record of his departure. Security checkpoints had seen nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. A small circle of trusted cardinals gathered, their faces etched with worry. The decision was made swiftly, born of necessity. They would tell no one. To announce that the spiritual leader of over 1 billion souls had disappeared would unleash a tidal wave of chaos across the globe. They would maintain the illusion of normalcy for as long as they could, but the world is always watching the Vatican. The next day, when the Pope failed to appear for a scheduled public address, the first ripples of concern began to spread. The official explanation was a sudden, mild illness. A plausible story, but it didn't feel right. The press began to speculate. Was it a more serious health emergency? A secret spiritual retreat? The theories swirled, growing wilder with each passing hour. No one, not in their most fevered imagination, could have guessed the simple, shocking truth. The truth of where he was, and why he had gone. But before we dive in, tell me where you're watching us from. And may God bless you wherever you are. Now let's begin. While the world looked for him in hospitals and secluded monasteries, Pope Leo XIV was thousands of feet in the air, flying not in the papal plane, but in the belly of a rattling cargo aircraft used for delivering supplies. Dressed in the simple black cassock of a common priest, he sat on a makeshift bench, the noise of the engines a deafening roar around him. He was not a pontiff, not a head of state, but simply a man on a mission, his face calm and resolute as he journeyed toward the forgotten heart of his own country. His destination was a remote village tucked away in the highest peaks of the Apennine Mountains, a place the modern world had left behind, a village named Monte Silenzio. His reason for this extraordinary journey rested not in a matter of church doctrine, but in a promise made to a humble soul. For nearly 30 years, a quiet, tireless nun named Sister Sophia had managed the papal household. She was more than just a housekeeper. She was a keeper of peace, a steady presence who moved through the grand halls of the Vatican with a grace and humility that often went unnoticed. She never asked for anything, but shortly before her retirement, the Pope had asked her about her home. With a sad, gentle smile, she spoke of Monte Silenzio. She painted a picture of a place clinging to a mountainside, a village slowly losing its lifeblood. The young people were leaving for the cities, seeking work and a future their home could no longer offer. The old stone houses were falling into disrepair, but the deepest wound was the village church. Its roof had collapsed years ago, its bell silenced by neglect. It was the heart of their community, and it had stopped beating. "Our faith is crumbling along with the stones, Your Holiness," she had confessed, her voice barely a whisper. Moved by her story, he had made her a promise. He told her that one day he would come and help her people rebuild the house of the Lord, not with the Vatican's riches, but with his own 2 hands. It was a promise she held in her heart, never truly expecting it could be fulfilled. But Pope Leo was not a man who made promises lightly, and the letter he left behind for Cardinal Giovanni contained a simple instruction: to trust in God's plan, and to tell Sister Sophia that he was finally on his way. When the Pope finally arrived in Monte Silenzio, the chill of the mountain air was sharp and clean. The village was even more desolate than Sister Sophia's words had painted. It seemed carved from the mountain itself, a collection of stone houses huddled together as if for warmth against the vast, indifferent sky. A few elderly faces peered from behind weathered doors, their eyes filled with a deep-seated weariness and suspicion for the newcomer. This was a place that had learned not to hope. He was no longer Pope Leo XIV. Here he was simply Father Leo, a humble priest sent to lend a hand. The only soul who knew his secret was Sister Sophia, who greeted him at the edge of the village. Her face, now etched with the fine lines of age, broke into a smile of pure disbelief and joy. She knelt to kiss his ring, but he gently lifted her to her feet. "Here, Sophia," he said softly, "I am just Leo, your brother in Christ." She led him through the winding, cobbled paths to meet the village elders. They gathered in the small, bare room that served as a town hall, their faces as rugged as the surrounding landscape. Among them was a man named Marco, a stonemason whose hands were calloused and strong, but whose eyes were hard and distant. He had lost his wife and son to an illness years ago, and had lost his faith along with them. He looked at Father Leo, not with reverence, but with a cynical disbelief, as if this priest were just another in a long line of well-meaning outsiders who would ultimately change nothing. Pope Leo did not preach. He did not make grand pronouncements or offer easy solutions. Instead, he simply sat with them. For days, he walked the village, listening to their stories. He shared their simple meals of bread, cheese, and soup, and he learned the names of their children and grandchildren who had long since moved away. He listened to their quiet grief for a life that was fading, and he felt the profound weight of their forgottenness. He knew that before he could ever hope to rebuild their church, he first had to earn their trust, a currency far more valuable than anything in the Vatican's vaults. At the highest point of the village, like a broken crown on an old king's head, stood the remains of the chapel of St. Michael. It had been the heart of Monte Silencio for centuries, its bell marking the hours, the seasons, and the moments of every villager's life. Now it was a hollow shell, a painful monument to their decline. The roof was gone, leaving the interior open to the harsh mountain weather. Weeds grew thick and green over the stone altar where generations had been baptized, married, and mourned. The villagers averted their eyes when they passed it. The ruin was a constant, silent reminder of everything they had lost, and of the prayers that to them had gone unanswered. After a week of listening and observing, Father Leo knew what he had to do. He asked the remaining villagers to gather in the small, wind-swept piazza. They came reluctantly, their faces a mixture of curiosity and doubt. He stood before them, not on a platform, but on the same worn cobblestones as everyone else. He pointed toward the skeletal remains of the chapel on the hill. "I know your hearts are heavy," he began, his voice clear and steady. "You look at that holy place and see only an ending. But what if together we could make it a new beginning?" He then laid out a plan, so simple and so audacious it stunned them into silence. He proposed that they rebuild the church themselves, not with money from the diocese or with professional contractors from the city, but with their own hands, stone by stone. He spoke of a church built not just of mortar and rock, but of shared work and rediscovered purpose. As he finished, a heavy silence fell over the small crowd. It was Marco, the stonemason, who finally broke it. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Words are cheap, Father," he said, his voice laced with scorn. "You ask us to rebuild a church? God left this village a long time ago. He does not hear us, and he does not care." The others nodded in grim agreement. To them, the priest's plan was not a message of hope, but the foolish dream of a man who did not understand the true depth of their despair. The next morning, as the first light of dawn spilled over the mountain peaks, a strange new sound echoed through Monte Silencio. It was the scrape of a shovel against stone. The villagers looked out their windows to see a sight that stirred something deep within their weary souls. Father Leo, with Sister Sophia beside him, was already at the ruined chapel. He had taken off his outer clerical coat, rolled up his sleeves, and begun the back-breaking work of clearing the debris. His hands, accustomed to turning the delicate pages of ancient texts, were soon raw and scraped as he lifted fallen timbers and broken stones. For days, the two of them worked alone. The villagers watched, a silent audience to this quiet act of faith. They saw this elderly priest, who could be sitting on a throne in Rome, choosing instead to labor under the hot sun, his face streaked with dust and sweat. His humility was a sermon more powerful than any words he could have spoken. He never asked for help, but his actions were a constant, gentle invitation. The first to break was an old widow named Elena. She appeared one afternoon with a bucket of fresh, cool water and 2 glasses, placing them on a flat stone without a word. The next day, a young man who had been planning to leave the village for good showed up with a wheelbarrow and began hauling away rubble. Then another came and another. They didn't come because of a grand speech, but because of the quiet, undeniable power of his example. The true turning point, however, came from Marco. The cynical stonemason had watched for over a week. His arms crossed, his face a mask of bitter disbelief. But he could not deny what he saw. He saw a dedication that defied logic. One afternoon he walked up the hill, his own worn tools in hand. He said nothing to Father Leo. He simply walked to a crumbling section of the main wall, picked up a trowel, and with the practiced, efficient movements of a master craftsman, he began to lay the first new stone. That single silent act was like a dam breaking. Within the hour, the chapel grounds were filled with the people of Monte Silencio, working together, their quiet determination drowning out the ghosts of their long despair. With every stone Marco laid and every timber the young men hoisted into place, the spirit of Monte Silencio grew stronger. Laughter, a sound rarely heard in those quiet streets, now echoed from the work site. The women of the village organized meals, bringing hot food and wine to the workers, turning the rebuilding of the church into a celebration of their own rebirth. The chapel was rising from its ruins, and with it the hope of the people. They were just days from completing the new roof, a symbol of the shelter and security they were building for one another. When the sky turned against them, dark, bruised-looking clouds boiled over the mountain peaks, and a fierce wind began to howl through the valley. A storm of legendary mountain fury was upon them. Rain fell not in drops, but in solid driving sheets. It turned the dry ground to mud and threatened to wash away the very foundations of their work. The new, unsecured roof timbers groaned under the assault, and the freshly laid mortar on the walls began to stream away. It felt like a cruel test, a final blow from a heaven that had forsaken them. Despair began to creep back into their hearts. But this time it was different. Father Leo, his face lashed by rain, rallied them. God is not testing our work, he shouted over the wind. He is testing our faith in each other. It was Marco, the man who had lost his faith, who responded first. He grabbed ropes and tarps, and with a voice that commanded respect, he began directing the others. In that raging storm, a miracle did happen. It was not a miracle of divine intervention, but of human solidarity. They worked through the night, a frantic, unified force against the chaos of nature. They formed human chains to divert torrents of water. They climbed the slippery scaffolding to lash down the precious timbers. They protected the vulnerable walls with their own bodies. When the storm finally broke at dawn, they stood exhausted, soaked and covered in mud, but the church was still standing. It stood not just because of stone and wood, but because a community had refused to let it fall. The sun that rose over Monte Silencio after the storm seemed to shine with a special brilliance, illuminating a village transformed. The chapel of St. Michael was complete. Its new roof was a crown of honest timber, its walls stood strong and true, and inside, the stone altar was clean and ready for service. It was more than a restored building. It was a testament to what they had overcome, a symbol of their own resilience. To celebrate, they planned a special mass to reconsecrate the sacred space, to formally welcome God back into the heart of their community. A young priest from a neighboring diocese, Father Antonio, was invited to officiate. Father Leo, with his characteristic humility, had insisted that he himself did not have the proper authority to lead the service. The villagers, who had come to love their quiet, hard-working priest, simply accepted his wishes. They were just happy he would be there, standing among them, a part of the family he had helped to reunite. The day of the Mass arrived. The chapel was filled with the scent of wildflowers and beeswax candles. The entire village was present, their faces bright with a joy and pride that had been absent for a generation. As Father Antonio made his way to the altar to begin the service, he passed the front pew, where Father Leo sat beside Sister Sophia and Marco. The young priest stopped. He looked at the old man with the calloused hands and the simple black cassock, and a wave of confusion, then utter shock, washed over his face. He grew pale, his eyes wide with an unbelievable recognition. Forgetting the service, forgetting everyone else in the church, Father Antonio slowly lowered himself to his knees. He bowed his head, his voice trembling as he spoke the words that would change everything. "Santo Padre," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Holy Father." A stunned silence fell over the congregation. The villagers looked from the kneeling priest to the man they knew as Father Leo. They saw the tired lines on his face, the dust still ingrained in his hands, and they tried to comprehend the impossible. Then as the truth dawned, a collective gasp swept through the chapel. The man who had mixed their mortar, who had carried their stones, who had stood with them in the storm, was Pope Leo XIV. Marco, the cynical stonemason, simply stared, tears welling in his eyes as he finally understood the profound, unbelievable grace he had been witness to. Pope Leo XIV rose slowly to his feet and gently motioned for the young priest to stand. He turned to face the villagers of Monte Silencio, his flock, who were looking at him with expressions of absolute awe. He did not speak to them as a pontiff from a throne, but as the friend who had worked beside them. "My dear friends," he said, his voice filled with a deep affection, "please do not see a stranger before you. I came here not as the Pope, but as a pilgrim. I came here looking for Christ, and I found him, not in the gilded halls of the Vatican, but in your faces, in your hard work, and in the spirit of a community that refused to be broken." He then celebrated the Mass, his voice not booming with authority, but resonating with the quiet strength of a faith that had been renewed by the very people he had come to serve. His return to the Vatican was as quiet as his departure, but the story of Monte Silencio could not be contained. It spread across the world, a modern parable of faith in action. The man who returned to the apostolic palace was not the same one who had left. The weight of the papacy was still on his shoulders, but his eyes now held the light of a different kind of wisdom, a wisdom earned through sweat and stone and fellowship. His first official act was not to write an encyclical or meet with diplomats, but to establish a new order within the Church. It was called the Order of St. Michael the Builder, a special mission that would send priests, bishops, and even cardinals to the forgotten corners of the world. Their duty was not just to preach, but to live and work among the people, to pick up hammers and trowels, to help rebuild not just crumbling chapels, but broken communities. One village at a time, the story of Pope Leo's secret journey became a powerful reminder that true authority does not come from a title or a position, but from a willingness to serve. He showed the world that the greatest strength can be found in humility, and that sometimes, to truly lead your flock, you must first be willing to walk among them, to get your hands dirty, and to help them rebuild their home with your own two hands. He had left the Vatican to save a single, forgotten village, but in doing so, he had shown the entire world how to begin healing itself.